And we're live.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again. This is our third Free Julian Assange Vigil. As many of you know, we are here tonight to discuss Julian Assange and his current situation. He is in London's prison Belmarsh right now. We're also here to discuss Chelsea Manning. Her fines have increased within the past few weeks, I believe. And so we are here to discuss these issues and also the issues of the free press and free speech. And I'm joined with my co-hosts, Christy Doff, Andrew Zygmunt, and our fourth co-host joins us tonight. We're really excited to have him on. Steve Waken In. He has his own show, Slow News Day, on YouTube, and you can find him on Twitter at Slow News Day Show. Steve, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you doing? On YouTube, and you can find him on Twitter at Slow News Day Show. Steve, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
It's weird to be happy to be here, but I'm happy to be here. It's weird to be happy to be here, but I'm happy to be here. I'm stoked that
we also have two special guests this evening. We're really excited about it. Nico House joins us and Brooke Hines. So thank you guys both for coming on tonight. And we look forward to kind of really getting into, you know, the certain topics that you really have a lot more to offer in your perspective and insight.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward.
Same here. Thanks for having me.
All right, Andrew, I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, so I don't know if people are aware or not, but it's something that Steve actually brought up on his show the other day that reminded me. This is the 3-year anniversary of when WikiLeaks brought out the original DNC emails during the convention in 2016. So this week, I really want to talk about everything that's changed since then, all that we've learned, and a lot of the other just stuff that's kind of in between there, like with the DNC fraud lawsuit that Nico was involved with, and just a bunch of other things that are behind the scenes that no one really talked about because they weren't really one of those mainstream media pieces. If you could, Nico, kind of go over for people what the DNC fraud lawsuit was and like where it stands right now.
Yeah, so myself, Jared H. Beck, and Elizabeth Lee Beck created the DNC fraud lawsuit because of the rigging that we saw taking place during the 2016 election. I'm not gonna get into all those details, but basically the rigging that I witnessed led me to the office of Jared and Liz. They have their own law firm, and I worked with them on their pack to investigate the rigging and then come up with a solution on how to deal with it. Even though Bernie eventually did end up losing, it wasn't really about whether he won or he lost. It was mostly about accountability, right? Because even if he won, every vote still wasn't counted. There was clear rigging that was taking place by the DNC. Debbie Wasserman Schultz obviously ended up having to resign. I know a lot of people remember Tulsi Gabbard left the vice chairwoman position because of the rigging, and then her specific response to a question I was asked about the Clintons was basically they said, are you worried about the Clintons? She said the Clintons don't scare me. That just lets you know how deep the rigging was and how much control they had over the situation. So the DNC fraud lawsuit essentially asserts that the DNC is a corporation. It is not just a political party. It's not some abstract like concept of organization. It is actually a registered nonprofit corporation. And the number one way that nonprofits get sued and lose usually is because they have a charter, which is required when you register as a nonprofit. And if you solicit donations under false pretense and you violate your charter, like especially if they violate your charter, your own charter, which the DNC has, you are liable to be sued. Now, because of a DC statute, basically anything that has to do with political cases at a federal level, if we win this lawsuit, it'll be about $900 million in damages that the DNC would have to pay. It's a lot of money. But the more important thing is to get to that discovery stage, start bringing some witnesses to the stand. There are going to be a lot of people subpoenaed. Hillary, anybody involved in the WikiLeaks emails, right? Podesta, Hillary, Obama, even Colin Powell, Tulsi will probably have to be called to the stand. Everybody involved, like Donna Brazile, hell, whoever was running the debates the last election, all these people are gonna have to be called to the stand. And no matter what the result is, there would be so much information brought out in the discovery phase that it could potentially cripple the Democratic Party going forward.
Do you think they'll actually let it get that far? Like in the
Well,
legal?
the judge that we will likely be seeing again after we get to this. So right now we're in the 11th Circuit Federal Appellate Court. They've already heard our case. Right now they're reviewing it. Now the good news is only about 7% of all federal cases end up actually getting the appeal approved to even be heard in front of a judge. And so when we got to that point, basically what they do is they break down what arguments can and cannot be made and what classes we can speak for, right? So there's anybody who's a part of the Democratic Party class, there's the donor class, there's the Bernie Sanders specific class, all these classes that Jared put forth so that we would have a backup plan just in case, right? Any of the classes fell through in court. And so now it's just a matter of what arguments we're going to be able to make, what classes we're going to be able to speak up for. And if even one class gets through, it goes into the discovery phase. And that's what happens. Now the judge that's in charge that would likely be hearing our case is Judge Locke. Ironically enough, this guy is the same man who's listening to the case about the Saudi Arabians being involved in 9/11. I know it's really weird. I'm like, man, you just are a magnet for crazy cases. But this judge used to be a Democrat, hated Democrats because of how corrupt they were. Used to be a Republican, hated Republicans because of how corrupt they were. So now he's acting independent. And he's basically voted. He has no problem making setting precedent with his rulings, and obviously this would be a huge precedent he'd set. But nonetheless, once we get into the discovery, I imagine we'll likely see a settlement offered. We're not taking the settlement. The goal is to expose them, no matter what it may. Sorry about that, but the goal is to expose them, no matter what it may cost, and no matter if we lose the court case. But if we lose the court case because of a ruling, that does not necessarily mean that we lost the battle, because we know that the important thing is that information. You know, divvying up 900 million. I mean, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's not really did. It came into play. The judge actually specifically asked I think it's Spiva, that's his name, the DNC's attorney, and he said, does the state and party fundraise for the presidential candidates at all? He said, oh no, I don't think so. That's not how it works. So he told a bold-faced lie. You know, it's untrue, especially considering we already knew about the Hillary victory fund before we even went into court. But you know, that's what they're going to do. They're going to maintain a lie. But I think the important thing is, especially circling back to the fact that this is a Julian Assange's vigil, is that Elizabeth Lee Voss educated me on something about a year or so ago that I didn't even know about, which plays a huge part into how we're going to be able to be successful in this fraud lawsuit, which is that WikiLeaks findings, their documents have been admissible in court and have never really been denied as being admissible all over the world in hundreds of cases. So in other words, the words that were, it's what people always say whenever they want to argue about Russiagate, whether it happened, whether it didn't happen. It didn't happen. But what people always ask on the progressive side, if you're actually, you know, if you care about the truth, is yeah, even if Russia did hack it, didn't y'all type the emails? Like, those are all your words.
Right.
And it's never been denied that those were their words. And so because of that, it's admissible.
Yeah, and that actually gives us a good kind of transition into Brooke here, because she actually did a recent piece on Seth Rich and some new information that came out on some court stuff. So if you could talk about that, that would be really cool.
Yeah, well, so I did 2 stories at the Florida Squeeze, the floridasqueeze.com. Right at the top, there'll be one that'll be my most recent one, which is on a lawsuit filed by Ed Butowski. And in this lawsuit, he's suing 3 major law firms and 3 major media companies for defamation. These 3 law firms have previously sued him for defamation on behalf of the Rich family, either Aaron Rich or the parents. Now, Ed Butowski is a conservative activist, and he's very political. So he's when I say an activist, he's a political activist, and he went after this information to get this information out to the public. So that's kind of important to understand on the front end.
Brooke, before you go any further, for people, and I'm sure most people are familiar with who Seth Rich was, just to provide some context for those who aren't so familiar, can you kind of give a brief background on him, please?
Yeah, good point. Seth Rich was a data director at the DNC, and he was walking home from a bar late one night and was shot in the back. And it's been said that this was the result of a botched robbery, that he was killed, that it was just something that happens in this sort of neighborhood. However, Julian Assange, as the story goes, as Ed Butowski lays it out, Julian Assange was afraid that that the killing had something to do with Seth Rich leaking the emails. So in the lawsuit, Ed Butowski lays out this narrative, which runs absolutely counter to the way any of the narratives about Seth Rich or the emails have gone. We all believe, as we saw, in the Mueller testimony today, that Russia hacked the United States, that they stole the election for Donald Trump. And what this case does is challenge that narrative. If Ed Butowski is successful in his lawsuit, if he's successful at bringing people in for discovery, getting depositions, he has the potential of overturning the whole Russiagate narrative. And so it would go like this. Butowski claims that in the fall of 2016, he was contacted by a mutual friend of Julian Assange. And she told him that Julian Assange wanted to get some information to the parents. And the information was that Seth Rich had leaked the emails. And Julian Assange thought that might help in the investigation to find the killer. That's kind of where Assange is coming from.
So I don't mean to convolute the story, because everything you said there is relatively accurate to my understanding. Wasn't there someone who came out a while ago that said they were the person that walked the flash drive into the embassy? I don't remember who the person was, but there was someone of like relatively important namesake that said that they had taken that in there, and I can't remember who that person is off the top.
I'm not familiar with.
Are you talking about the former? Oh my goodness. You talking about the guy like that works for WikiLeaks, and he used to be like a British official?
I think
for like the Ukraine or something like that.
I think so. I'll look it up real quick.
So there's
real quick though, I want to point out while we're talking about Seth Rich, Donna Brazil dedicated her book to Seth Rich's memory, and I believe it was on Tim Black's show, where she referred to him as that poor baby and showed a lot of whatever passes for empathy coming out of Donna Brazil. And she is all over these emails. She's all over. I mean, she went from being the chair of the DNC to CNN and Fox contributor back into working she's involved. She knows where a lot of the bodies are buried. She probably knows where Seth Rich's body is buried, why he was shot.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I didn't know that. Also, I do want to touch on this just really quickly. Brooke, when I first read a very well done article, by the way, when I read it, I was what kind of struck me was the fact that I know that Assange ran a pretty tight ship and that he protected his sources and their anonymity, and he really valued that. So I thought it was kind of strange that he would be willing to kind of disclose that information to another individual. And I think maybe some other people might feel that way. Can you maybe kind of explain or provide some context to that, please?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
So the person, the intermediary her name is Ellen Ratner. And she's the sister of Michael Ratner, who had been an attorney for WikiLeaks and had recently passed away before she made this trip. So the information was passed along in the context of a family meeting. They were, the way I understand what happened was they were in the process of passing the torch from Michael Ratner to I think to his wife or to his ex-wife. So there was some back and forth and some things were in flux after he died. And so that's why Ellen Ratner visited him, and she was the source of this information to Ed Butowski. So she calls him and she says, look, I got this information from Assange. By the way, Ellen Ratner is a Fox News analyst, so Fox Cable News, and she's also a White House correspondent for Talk Radio News. So she's a media person, and in addition to Assange being kind of loose with this information with a third party, I think that it's remarkable that a media person didn't do anything with this information. And instead what they were doing was they were going to try and reach out to the parents for what Assange allegedly said was, that they needed to learn this for purposes of closure, for purposes of maybe finding the murderer, and so on. Let's see. So 2 months pass between the time Ellen Ratner passes that information to Butowski and when he actually calls the Rich parents, Joel and Mary Rich. And this is on December 17, 2016. When he calls them, they tell him, Joel does, allegedly in the complaint, Joel Rich says, yeah, I know that Seth and Aaron helped leak those emails, and we're really scared that everyone's going to think that our sons and our family had something to do with getting Donald Trump elected. And that's understandable.
To highlight something from last week, because we talked about the propaganda that was coming out on CNN, they're trying to control the narrative in a way, at least in my opinion. And what they're trying to do is they now have to pivot off of Russian hacking and Russian collusion and still find some way to turn it into a propaganda effort without admitting that they killed the DNC staffer. That's my personal opinion. And right now they tried to do this. They gave like a 9-minute video and a bunch of articles on CNN about how he turned the Ecuadorian embassy into a Russian spy operation and just crazy stuff like that. And basically trying to find a way to say that he received these documents in person through some kind of handoff of a stick, as opposed to getting them released to him via the internet. And so that's an interesting pivot to watch, just as this whole Mueller thing is happening, because the media is going to try to change the narrative from Russian hackers gave him it to a Russian spy or someone working with the Russians handed him a flash drive. So that's something really important that, like, we as the people in the media can call out, is that we can't just say, we can't just let CNN and stuff run away with another narrative about WikiLeaks and about the Russian collusion and let them try to start it again from another angle. So I think it's really important that like every creator calls that out and puts that in the forefront of like, this can't happen. Like this was this person, these are the facts that we know, this is the things that are still being proven in court, but we have evidence on this side and we have basically pure CIA operation on the other. So it's
That
something that I think is really important to keep highlighting and driving home is we don't know who it is, but we have this person that was murdered that worked in this position at the DNC that is more likely than these Russian operatives that they're trying to push on people.
Well, and that's super interesting that there's this pivot because that would that indicates to me that the William Benny, the Bill Benny information or forensics work, where he's shown that the that there's no way the data, this large amount of data, could have been downloaded in the amount of time that it shows on all of the files. In other words, the files all stack up in an amount of time that is, you can't get that kind of transfer rate over the internet. You can get it on a thumb drive. So I find it really interesting that there's a pivot to start talking about a thumb drive. And there had been, so there's two things. There's that story that came up on CNN with the that there could have been a handoff because Julian Assange was using the Ecuadorian embassy as a an office or a hub for his work. To me, that was a terrible story, and it wasn't done very well, and I didn't get much out of it. But
So I want to
it is super
real
important.
quick about what I had just said about the media saying that someone had handed him a thumb drive and things like that. I looked up the article and it seems like a propaganda piece. I just didn't read enough into it the first time. But essentially, it looks like the founder of Fusion GPS, Glenn Simpson, said that Nigel Farage has handed him that had taken a thumb drive to WikiLeaks. So I just want to clarify that that's the person that basically the same people that were responsible for investigating the DNC servers said that Glenn Simpson said that Nigel Farage had handed Julian a flash drive. So I'll post
And
that.
real quick, I'd like to thank Nico House for coming on tonight. He had to split. It was really cool to have him on. Hopefully we can get him on again one of these times when he's got a little bit more time. So we appreciate that. And back at it, Andrew. Sorry, I just wanted to get that out.
Yeah, no, that's all. I just
Yeah.
wanted to issue that correction that the article that I was thinking of was Glenn Simpson accusing Nigel Farage of handing information over to Julian. So I want to say that that's probably not accurate information.
Well, and you can see the political how
Mhm.
they're trying to bend the narrative there. They're saying that number one, it's a flash drive, so that's going to satisfy the Bill Benny critique, and they're also saying that it was Nigel Farage who's aligned with interests that people can recognize as being kind of like Trump over there. So as a propaganda piece, we can deconstruct that. As a propaganda piece, we can read the subtext there and say, oh, okay, I see what they're doing. There had been, so it's kind of confusing, there had been a story that Craig Murray, the former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, had told a story a few times. Once on Scott Horton's show, I think is where he went into it the most, where he talked about having a meeting with somebody involved in this leak outside of American University in Washington, D.C. And he said that wasn't when a thumb drive was handed over to him, but that it was a meeting that facilitated that whole thing happening. So the fact that Craig Murray had jumped in on this, to me, was very compelling. And then the other thing I thought was really compelling that got me interested in this is that Seymour Hersh, an audio clip of Seymour Hersh talking to, we know he was talking to Ed Butowski emerged a year or so ago, might be 2 years ago, on a YouTube channel called Debunking Rod Wheeler. At first, there was just nearly 7 minutes. It was all edited. You couldn't tell who the other person was on the phone call. Now, since then, just this weekend, the full 20 minutes of the conversation have been posted on Debunking Rod Wheeler. So you can hear all of the context. You can hear Butowski asking Cy Hirsch questions, trying to keep Cy Hirsch focused on the questions.
Cy Hirsch, by the way, is a living fucking legend and a total prick.
Right.
If you're unfamiliar with the character Cy Hirsch, the character Cy Hirsch is just a notorious asshole. And like this 20 minutes of audio, oh, it just encompasses that so perfectly, man. And like, I'm not knocking the guy for being an asshole. He broke the Miley massacre, dude. He can, like Cy Hirsch can have a good opinion of Cy Hirsch, but man, is he like if you made Greg Palast mean, like really, really mean. If people don't have a picture of Cy Hirsch in their head, but maybe they do have a picture of Greg Palast in their head, like they've got the trench coat, they've got the hat, the rumpled suit and all that shit, dude. Just, but yeah, that is a fantastic piece of audio. I put it up on my website too. I think it's in my podcast playlist. I think that's where I stuck it. But yeah, find that, download it while you can, because it may not be around forever. Share it with your friends. Because
Yes.
all of this, to circle it back to Assange, and then you can go back to the story, all of this isn't going to be possible if they get a kill-free press. If Julian Assange gets to go be tortured in prison or accidentally, just not get up one morning in Belmarsh or whatever it fucking is, if they get away with eroding what's left of the veneer of the First Amendment, we don't get to have these stories. We don't get to have these conversations. So having said that, this is a fucking fascinating story, and please let's get back to it.
So real quick, everyone who's watching, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe and stuff, all those good things. But with this too, like, what are you thinking, Christy? Because you've been quiet this whole time.
So I wanted to ask Brooke her opinion, if she had one, on why she thinks this is coming out now, why this lawsuit is coming out now. Is there anything interesting that she feels is coordinated with the timing and potentially with the indictments against Julian Assange?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting timing. So Butowski's lawyer filed an amended complaint, and he filed an amended complaint without the judge actually asking for it. So this is kind of like lawyer stuff and protocol, but he jumped the gun and he pushed this amended complaint out, it seems to me, to get it out there before Mueller or around Mueller. I think that in other words, there's something to me that just seems a little funny about jumping the gun on the judge and pushing this information out there super quickly. And he might get his hand slapped by the judge who says, I didn't really ask for this yet, but we'll see.
So I know that there were back in March of 2018, there were 3 lawsuits against Butowski, and you make this really fabulous point in your article saying that there is so much effort being put into this that it seems kind of silly that they would put this much effort into something that was totally false or a conspiracy theory. So clearly there's something that's trying to be suppressed here from the public. And I think it's a really important point that you're making, and it kind of just ties everything all together. And he actually has been quite successful with beating these lawsuits. Can you get into that too?
Yeah, this is a sprawling story, and it goes in a lot of different directions. And that's a very important point, because in 1 week in March in 2018, 3 different humongous litigation firms all filed similar lawsuits against Ed Butowski. And then just a few weeks later, Amanda Marcotte in Salon writes this article about how, oh, can we use lawsuits to beat down conspiracy theories? We can use this to
Hey,
silence
Brooke,
people.
real quick, I do want to, I don't know if this has any connection at all, but I do want to make note real quick. March of 2018 is an interesting month because it was during that month that Assange lost his internet access and that the United States filed their first charge against him, the conspiracy to commit computer intrusion, I believe. I know they filed something in March of 2018. So I think it's very interesting that all this is kind of happening at this one specific time. I just wanted to kind of put that out there before you continued.
That is super interesting. I'm making a note of that. Yeah, so, you know, here's a conversation that I keep having is it 3 law firms filing these kinds of lawsuits that are expected to be, you know, long drawn out kind of, you know, fights. You're expecting 7 figures at least to make this happen. Now, the lawyers keep saying, oh, we're working on a volunteer basis, but you never hear them say pro bono. They say we're working on a volunteer basis, but that wouldn't preclude someone paying their fees. So to me, what I think, you know, and this is just me, and this is just speculation, but the DNC wanted to silence this really, really bad. They wanted to silence it bad enough to spend a hell of a lot of money to engage these law firms. That's speculation on my part, but I have yet to find the mystical unicorn animal that is a lawyer who works for free. You know, on giant cases like this, it just doesn't happen. So this is very political. They were spending this money, they're going to this trouble because they wanted to quash this story. And the story is that Seth Rich leaked the emails instead of Russia hacking them. So, you know, this goes to everything that happened today in the Mueller hearing or testimony, which is if Russia didn't hack the email, then Hillary Clinton lost the election all on her own, and Donald Trump won the election because she was a terrible candidate, and none of this nonsense that we've been going through for 2.5 years, going on 3 years, has any relation to reality. And if you watch the shows tonight, and I'm sorry if you did, they're trying to hold on to this narrative so desperately. I mean, the MSNBC is just a wreck. It's like watching a family, you know, find out that there's been like sexual abuse or something, and they're like all in this like amazing denial, and everyone's frantically trying to, you know, clean up the mess.
Simultaneously crapping themselves.
Oh yeah.
It is so this is what Mueller's testimony was supposed to do, though. It was supposed to give them enough semblance of red meat to chew on where they can now spend however long running with the narrative of, oh, he committed obstruction, we're going to get him the minute he leaves office, which will only happen if you vote for one of these 75 empty suits, you know. Mueller already set up the WikiLeaks can be the fall guy in this if you guys spin it hard enough narrative when he delivered the Mueller report.
And he also echoed what Mike Pompeo said. I'm not exactly sure exactly when he said it, but he was on tape saying that WikiLeaks is a hostile intelligence agency. I believe he said something to that effect, but I know for sure that he said that it was very
non-state intelligence.
But he said that it was very dangerous or not dangerous. He used some term to describe it in a negative way, that by then candidate Trump saying that he supported WikiLeaks, saying I love WikiLeaks, he was saying that that was such a dangerous thing to say. So he clearly is not shy in hiding the fact that he does not care for Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. But as far as the testimony today, I have to say that I was actually unbelievably shocked by Mueller's demeanor. I mean, watching it at times, you thought, were you even working on this report? You have to wonder, like, how much was he involved in this? Because he didn't know basic things that many of the journalists who aren't that good in the mainstream media, things that they knew. So it was just very,
Well,
it was odd. Go ahead, Steve.
It was ordered by Judge Dabney Friedrich to drop the pretense that the Internet Research Agency was a puppet outlet of the Kremlin and was following orders directly from Vladimir Putin, and that whole narrative and everything that sprung from it, he wasn't allowed to talk about coming into this hearing. So that may have something to do with his sudden memory loss or apparent obfuscation, or the fact that he looked like he had taken about 14 Xanaxes before he walked in the room, because maybe he was stressed out, had some anxiety. Maybe he needed a fistful of Xanax. You know, there's a lot of shit
I mean,
he wasn't allowed to talk.
after you're a fucking war criminal that promotes the war in Afghanistan as weapons of mass destruction, you probably need to be on a lot of fucking Xanax to get through your day. Like,
It seemed that both sides, the congressmen and women that were asking him questions, were a little mystified by his lack of answers and his lack of knowledge.
mhm.
Yeah, I agree. And they also were very much like pandering to him. It was almost sickening. Like they were like praising him. And at one point, I think I tweeted about it too, is I thought to myself, are these congressmen and women, are they representing us, the people, or the intel community? Because the way that they were trying to kind of like coddle him was just really strange. And it was definitely more so from those on in the Democratic Party that were doing that. But I don't know if any of you guys kind of noticed that and were kind of like disturbed by it, because they're supposed to be representing us, not these elite powerful. I mean, they represent them too, but I just felt that the overpraise of him was just kind of inappropriate.
They engaged in a conspiracy theory that they knew going into it was a conspiracy theory to push a fake narrative to distract the country, while fucking billionaires got tax cuts. We kept bombing people. We ramped up operations in Africa. We're about to fucking uh, get into the rare earth mineral theft business. I mean, I've said this before on my show, and I'll keep saying it until it fucking sinks in. If they could get Trump on anything they're not guilty of themselves, they would have already done it. And the only point you could possibly make with that would be the emoluments clause, but they won't, because it
They-
stops their gravy train. So what they
So,
have to do is
his
fabricate
emoluments
shit out of
clause
whole cloth
case-
and innuendo.
with his emoluments clause case, I believe he was actually like, that case was dismissed. I don't think he was like found innocent, but they just let that case go. So I think that's a pretty important thing to point
Right.
out. Basically,
And so,
if
I mean, my
person
point to
starts
all
that,
that, though,
like if they get emoluments on one person, they can take it on everybody. He can be like,
Yeah.
okay, well, let's see how much Nancy Pelosi's made from dirty money.
yeah,
But two quick things real fast. So I don't know if he works for free because he is still an attorney. But you had talked about wanting someone that could do like political representation essentially, or has worked on those kinds of cases. I would recommend Bob Fitzrakis. I can send you his information offline, but he's basically an attorney that's worked on political cases his whole life. He was one of the people that turned up the voter cross-check system and stuff like that. So he's pretty like well versed on how that kind of process works. So even if he could provide you some guidance for free, I know he would. But the other thing, talking about the hostile non-state intelligence service, um, that's something that I kind of want to use, and it's something I think that we could have a little bit of fun with. To where I had talked with Christy offline about it and a couple other people, and I want to put out a call to action to everybody. For everybody that's watching this stream now, all 20 people that are on, and everyone that'll come back and watch it later. I think it would be really cool if you could go out into your communities at some point this week, whether it's to like a local festival or an event or just some kind of community gathering, or even if you're in a city that has a busy street that you could talk to people on. print a couple signs and see if you can engage in conversation with a few people and take 5 pictures of the "We Are Millions" of the people holding the Julian Assange banner that says, "I am Julian Assange," or "Assange's freedom is my freedom," and lines like that. So I think that would be a really cool thing to have just people try to do. And I would say use hashtag hostile non-state intelligence agent. It's something that I put on my profile because I was just thinking about getting a hoodie with that printed across the back. But also hashtag absolute determination. I think that would be really cool to try to get started too, just so that way people can highlight what they're doing in the real world, and if they're not comfortable using like hostile non-state intelligence agent when they do things.
Yeah, and also to build off of that too, I just try to start something up. I don't know if many people are doing it yet, but if you're somebody that can't really physically be out there and don't feel comfortable maybe doing that, you can also write to your press clubs. I know that I did this. They claim to be for free speech and for free press, and we need to hold them accountable for that. So write them a letter, ask them to issue a formal statement in support of Julian Assange and in condemnation of the 18 charges filed by the US government. I have posted tips on how to do this on our website. Many of it's like self-explanatory, but I think a great way to go about it is to kind of go to their website, study it, use their own language to kind of support your own points. And don't automatically assume that they're not going to issue a statement, because you kind of want to be like friendly to them, because if you come at them with hostility, you probably won't get your way. Unfortunately, I did write to the Press Club of Cleveland, and they said that that his situation does not affect journalists in Northeast Ohio. Of course, that's not true. So if they do, say something like that, just continue the conversation and continue to hold them accountable. And we have information on how to do that on our website, action for the number 4 assange.com/write press clubs. And I think the person in particular who made the graphic, I can't remember what their name is, but they made a really awesome graphic. But yeah, I think it's a great way to kind of, if you're not somebody who's able to really go out there and do things, it's not difficult to kind of draft up a letter and email it.
And something too, and this goes with any like smaller media organization, they don't get much social media interaction. Like they post stuff and it gets like 2 likes and 2 retweets and then disappears. So tagging them in stuff on Twitter and on Facebook and things like that pushes it to the top of their feed constantly. So that's, if you are going to do a digital activism route, constantly tagging them in posts talking about the subject, or as ways to educate the people that work there, and engaging in basically making sure their news feed gets filled with accurate information about Julian's situation. And then just like Taylor was saying, continue sending them information to try to get them on your side. And then if worse comes to worse, call them out. Like, bad press is still something that can be used against these people, because if we can get a big enough community of people to care, then we can actually get these people to start answering, at least in some manner, to us.
So I just looked at, there is no press club near me. The closest one is in San Francisco, but they have a thing like universities have media day. Does everybody live close to your university town? I do. Do you? Does anybody listening? Do you live close? Do you see where I'm going with this? If we are still holding these vigils because Julian Assange is still in Belmarsh, you see if you can't find a media day at a campus by you, go show up to that. You can talk to people directly. You can talk to members of the press club directly. You could even film it.
Yeah, filming's a good way to go about it, definitely, because then it happens in real time. But then once you get it out there, more people will be exposed to it. It's a good point.
So I wanted to bring up a topic really quick while we have everybody on a new prime minister, but there's been some interesting things happening in the last couple days. So one of them, Sir Alan Duncan, resigned as the foreign office minister yesterday morning, or 2 days ago actually, is on the 22nd. And in his letter, he actually mentioned negotiating the eviction of Julian Assange from the Ecuador embassy. So that was kind of an interesting tidbit. in addition to that, Mr. Javid actually tweeted a personal thank you to the Ecuadorian ambassador and a picture of the two of them for helping to resolve the Assange impasse. Our actions show that no one is above the law, and I'm glad to see Assange has himself now recognized that by withdrawing his appeal. So not only we have these two things, but we now have a new prime minister in the UK. So I mean, by just self-recognition, they are starting to admit that this was planned, that the UK government was involved and getting him out of the embassy and really not hiding it anymore. So what do you guys think about that? What do you think about the new PM? Do you think that will be advantageous to Julian Assange's extradition hearing? And
I think
yeah,
the act
I'm
of him
glad that
getting taken out of the embassy was literal human trafficking in plain sight, where the United States got, I believe, the International Monetary Fund to cut Ecuador a check or a loan for a couple $1 billion, and then Julian gets dragged out of the embassy. Like there's a lot of
4.2 billion, I believe it was.
there's a lot of other
4.2.
factors in there, but I think that that's something that has to be stressed. Like this is human trafficking. They literally sold Julian out of the embassy for $4 billion. And that's something that no one really ever coins it in that way, but it's literally a prisoner in Ecuador, essentially, because his internet got cut. He was being monitored constantly, got sold to the UK in hopes of making it to the American prison system. So I just want to make sure that everyone kind of can
With
use
the
that
help
language
of
because that's human
installing
trafficking.
with the help of installing a US UK friendly president too,
Hmm.
yeah.
because there was heavy Western influence in Ecuador's last election.
Right.
And they saw Julian as a way to better their relationship with the United States. And I think I brought it up in the last vigil, but yeah, they're essentially using a human being to like pay off loans or build a better relationship. And I think you're right, Andrew, it does need to be called out for what it is. Unfortunately, that's not the language and the sort of idea and message that most people are being exposed to. So again, that's why it's really important that we do touch on that. So Christy, I'm glad you did bring that up about the new prime minister. I'm glad it's not Jeremy Hunt though, because I mean, he had some really inflammatory, I mean, that's not even the right term to use, but he had some very disturbing comments to make about Julian Assange, all while trying to make himself appear as if he was for a free press. Can you kind of talk about, if you can, Boris Johnson and some of his perspectives on free speech and free press?
Yeah, so there WikiLeaks tweeted out today a quote by Boris Johnson, and I can see if I can pull that up. But he has definitely not been as outspoken about Julian Assange quite to the length that Jeremy Hunt was.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremy Hunt now sounds like he is no longer a part of the UK government. So WikiLeaks tweeted out a quote from just a couple weeks ago, even by Boris Johnson. Media organizations should feel free to bring important facts into the public domain. There can be no conceivable case, in my view, for prosecuting, newspapers or media organizations for publishing stuff like this. Where there plainly isn't any risk to national security, a prosecution on this basis would amount to an infringement on press freedom and have a chilling effect on public debate. And this is about the cables that were released earlier. It was a big story in the UK. So on this quote alone, it would really be a little hypocritical for the new PM to then support the extradition of Assange. So yeah, I guess we will see. I don't know if anybody else has any other handy quotes from Boris Johnson that he has
This
maybe
is
made
actually
in
where
light
I would
of press
really like
freedoms.
to bring. This is why I'd really like to bring Jamal Thomas on at some point. He is an American, but he makes videos about UK politics like crazy. He's basically the source that I go to if I try to find anything specific about him. So I hope to get him on one day to talk about like what's going on in the UK. And then obviously someone in the UK would know best.
I say we
Oh.
all
Yes.
bug George Galloway until
Oh yeah,
Yes, that would
I
be.
love George Galloway.
That would
He's
be
guys
awesome.
too that are listening. For sure. How do I unpin this? There we go. Yeah. Yeah, that goes for everybody in the audience too. If you would like to see people on these streams, ask them politely once or twice, maybe. Don't, harass people or anything, but yeah. And let us know too, because we're we want to hear from you.
Yeah, because one thing that we're trying to do with these streams is build like conversations with interesting people. Like we're still trying to feel our way through it and get it all figured out, but that's a goal, is to be able to build bridges for people, like how I don't know, just getting different activists on and different people showing what they've done to help inspire people, but then also bringing maybe local groups together or national people that haven't really had a chance to talk about a situation in a certain way. So
I know
think that,
somebody suggested, Beth B said Gordon Dimmick would be great. I hope I'm saying that right.
Yes.
Chris, I know you were on his show, but yeah, that's what somebody suggested to us. So
Yeah, I would love to
maybe,
get
yeah.
Gordon on. That would be great.
but we really appreciate you coming on, Brooke. I'm sorry that you've been so quiet lately.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
So today I do want to get your thoughts, Brooke, on, because I know you alluded to, again, and I don't want to keep like driving this point over and over again, but I know that you alluded to Mueller testifying in your article. Can you kind of give some of your thoughts on some of the things that he said or didn't say? That you found that were, perhaps interesting?
Who said or didn't say?
Mueller, anybody, but
Oh,
Mueller, during the testimony. Sorry if I was not clear.
In the testimony today.
Yeah.
I saw exactly what you saw, first of all, and what everybody else saw, which is Mueller came in there looking like he had just taken a bottle of Xanax. He obviously had a strategy to play deaf, like he wasn't going to hear anything, and everybody had to repeat what was being said. What Steve brought up with the judge's order, Dabney Frederick's order about, you got to hew to the facts. You can't connect Russia and the Russian government to the IRA and to the troll farms and to all of that. That's a pretty major constraint. And in that order, Dabney Frederick said, "Look, I'm not sanctioning anybody right now. I don't feel like I have to. We're going to use progressive discipline." And I think that's the kind of thing that people like Mueller take seriously. But I think there's something else going on here too. I think that Democratic leadership don't want to pursue impeachment. Rather, what they want, and they see this as a win-win, if this stays out in the public mind as a political battle, then that satisfies the Democrats, and it doesn't really make the Republicans unhappy, because they see it as a winning political issue for them. And honestly, as I watched the whole thing, I felt like for the first time in my life, and I've been watching this stuff since 1991 when with the Anita Hill hearings. This is the first time I heard Republicans asking questions in a setting like this, and I felt like they were being more honest brokers than the Democrats. It was absolutely appalling the way that the Democrats were behaving through all of this.
Was Jim Jordan in it at all? I haven't had a chance to watch it.
Yeah, he got pretty well. I that's interesting you bring him up, because I remember when I was watching this, I thought,
He's
wow,
my congressman.
he made a lot.
Like I could run against him right now if I wanted to.
Okay, he had a lot of emotion behind what he was asking. You could tell, obviously, he was not buying into the Russiagate conspiracy. I can't remember exactly what he was asking him about, but his demeanor was very aggressive, I would say. And he definitely was asking tough questions, but yeah, I just over and over again, and I predicted this would happen. Mueller was unable to answer many of the questions. He said that he couldn't answer them. And he also didn't remember a whole lot. And I understand that, that makes sense. He's an older guy. And also, that's a lot of material that they're working with. But I mean, I felt like there wasn't really much to gain from today.
Saying you don't remember is just, that's what lawyers do. And
Remember Alberto Gonzalez?
yeah,
I don't recall something like 54 times in a hearing. Jeff Sessions. They all. It's a ploy. What's incredible to me, and you brought it up, Brooke, is that the GOP came across as the more honest actors. The reason being is that pretty much everybody in that room knows the truth.
yep.
And they can only tell so much of it at a time. But when you see a politician, and most of these guys are fucking lawyers too, when you see them and they realize they can tell the truth, like it's a different kind of puff up when they go to throw the question. It's really weird. Like you got to watch for it, but they're fully cognizant in the moment that they're telling the truth and that this is something that they rarely get to do. Like it's going to be weaponized, and if it stays political, then absolutely it will more than likely benefit the Republicans in this. If the Democrats,
I just want to make a quick prediction real fast, like just while we're on this topic that I can throw out there, is that as fucking terrible and as horrible as it's going to be, it is going to be a Trump 2020 win. Like let's just get the charade and game over with. Like the Democrats are going to do some fuck shit. They're going to screw over their own party. And then
barring a financial collapse,
yeah,
I agree with you. I do. But if the Democrats can spin it this way, where it's Robert Mueller clearly said that there was going to be there was an obstruction of justice charge, and we can get him after the election. That's what they're gonna waste their time doing. They're gonna plan all these jail Trump rallies that were just as pointless as passing out pussy hats and letting Debbie Wasserman Schultz speak. Like it's going to be a nonsensical media farce if they can successfully push the narrative. Robert Mueller done said he committed obstruction and we can arrest him the minute he gets out of jail. And they can do that all the way till they lose.
And that's what they'll do. That's
going to be really hard to prove obstruction of justice at this point, because then they have to really prove that, his like motives for doing things, I believe, as far as like paying people off.
It's like getting a resisting arrest charge without any other charge. Like you can't, well, they do it, but you can't get a resisting arrest when you aren't charged with something else. You can't obstruct justice if there was no justice to be done. And I think that'll be the biggest like thing that he uses is no, like I'm innocent. Like this guy was on 12 Xanax trying to testify. Like and I feel like that's what he's going to use, and it's going to be disgusting because there's so much that he's wrong on, but it'll be this one fucking issue that they let him be right on to continue empire.
Yeah, because this isn't going
again
away.
Because
to
charge Trump with anything legitimate, they're all guilty of the same shit. So they have to fabricate it out of whole cloth. They have to take enough innuendo and enough fucking like loose pieces of sort of information and cobble it all together and then give it to Rachel Maddow and say, go fucking sell some shit. That's why the DNC fraud lawsuit is so dangerous. It's why the new Seth Rich lawsuit is so dangerous. It's why Julian Assange is so dangerous. The daylight that can be shown on them going after Trump for something legitimate and having it bounce back on him, like the Clinton Foundation being investigated, the investigation into that being open. I mean, it's worth it for that, and that's why they won't do it. If the public was actually able to digest the amount of shit that anybody's government does to them instead of for them, we'd all be in the street. So exposing that is not in the interest of either party. So they're going
It's
to obviously.
actually, so in a recent House bill, they are forcing the Pentagon to release information about the weaponization of ticks in the like 1960s or 1940s or 50s or something like that. And that's just a really interesting way of trying to like funnel public dissent almost. Like, okay, if people start looking, here's this thing that we can have to run as a headline to show as like, oh, look at this. We're going to show you that, oh, the government did this bad, but we're not going to show you all of the other things that exist in the background.
Man, they should start republishing all the reporting on the Church Commission.
We should have celebrities reading the church committee or the church commission report. That's what I want to see.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Somebody set that up. That
Did you
would be
guys know
awesome.
about the business plot? Have you guys ever heard of that? That happened back in the day?
Smedley Butler.
Yeah, with like
Yeah.
DuPont CEOs and a bunch of other people trying to get fascism introduced into the United States by getting Smedley Butler post World War I to basically seize control of government.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like things like this happen all the time. Like this is something that they've always tried to do.
Yep.
So that's what this is. It's an exercise in tyranny to see what they can get away with. And so far they've
Prescott
gotten
Bush
away with it.
was heavily involved in that, by the way, the trying to recruit a general to overthrow.
Right. So instead they just started running themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what Trump is. He's just a billionaire trying to continue empire when empire is collapsing.
Yeah, the American industrial class was totally on board with Germany early in the war.
Because fascism makes money. I mean, it's the fusion of economic and political power. Like that's literally creating wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I started to talk and I realized I was muted. Yeah, so I know that because it's the 3-year anniversary, right, of the emails being leaked, we kind of wanted to maybe touch on a little bit about what WikiLeaks has exposed, because, you know, that's too often lost in the message, I think, because we do focus on, you know, Julian, and that's very, very important, but it's also important to focus on what they revealed to us, because ultimately nothing really has been done as a result of what they have exposed. And what I mean by that is that nobody has essentially been held accountable for that. So any thoughts on how we can apply some of the information that we learned through WikiLeaks to today and kind of what we're experiencing in this country?
That's actually a question that I wanted to ask Nico. And just in another term is, what can we do, like as the Free Julian Assange people and the Free Chelsea Manning people, to pressure creators to make previous leaks relevant to modern news stories? And I think part of it was like with what you were doing, pulling up information out of WikiLeaks and sharing it, like just directly. Trying to get content creators like Jimmy Dore and like Nico House and others to not make a video specifically about WikiLeaks, but when they make a video about the war in Iran, pull up leaks that include the way that we conduct foreign diplomacy from WikiLeaks, because they're all there, and use them as reference material instead of only using like CNN and MSNBC and Washington Post articles.
So I haven't specifically done that with WikiLeaks, but when I do source information, 9 times out of 10, if not all the time, it's from an independent media outlet. I really try to make a point to do that, and it's really not that difficult, especially when you have outlets like Mempress News and Consortium. There's the online magazine, The Last American Vagabond, has a lot of good stuff on it. There's a ton of sources that you can go to that you don't have to when you do when we do our thing, you don't have to use mainstream media at all.
Yeah.
You got to do for it, but yeah, I'll highlight your independent content creators and
We should maybe like create like a list of like good, but then I don't want to make it seem as if we're telling people what to watch and what to not watch, but basically just emphasizing the point of, get your news from alternative sources, because their message isn't getting filtered down to them through these big corporations and companies. And obviously they're getting their funding from their viewers. So there's no like conflict of interest where they're having to expose or investigate the people that they're being employed by. So yeah, I definitely think it's important to get your news from alternative sources. RT is another one that's really good. I really like to read RT and watch a lot of their live streams, because they do cover topics that aren't typically covered in American. Well, they do have an American outlet, but that are not typically covered in mainstream media.
So, Brooke, I have a question. If someone wanted to get started as an independent journalist, what do you think the best way to do that would be?
So I started my career as a publisher of an alternative weekly back when publishing dead trees, printing on dead trees was the only way to do it. And the way the way you do it is you don't wait for anyone to ask you to do it. You just start doing it. We have a lot of great tools for platforming our work now. So it's pretty easy to to use those platforms. It's also easy to create your own space, your own website, which I think is real important right now, because people are getting deplatformed on YouTube and on or demonetized at least. So a couple of things. When you start out doing this work, you have to be very cognizant about how you're going to where you're going to put it, whether you're going to do print or audio or video or all three. And my suggestion is to pick one and get good at it and stick to it. And also think about your business model on the side. That kind of has to be a piece of this. And my approach has always been, don't rely like on the platform, so when people are being demonetized on YouTube, they're vulnerable to this big company taking away money from them, because they weren't able to build other revenue streams or other ways to bring money into it. So I think like one of the things that doesn't exist that I wish existed more was a kind of an advertising exchange. Digital advertising is cheap, and especially within the ecosystem of progressive media and the kind of stuff that we would want to promote amongst ourselves. That is something that we could trade with each other. It's something that we could do for very cheap, and we would be hitting our audiences right where they're at, So I think we should be doing a little bit more of that. But indie journalists just starting out, oh my God, just do it. Don't wait for anybody. And it's never been easier. You don't have to print 15,000 newspapers and drive them around in a van and ask bars to keep your papers anymore. You don't have to go sell ads to make it all happen. You can just make it happen.
Cool. So Jessica Mooney, I hope I said that right in the chat, asked, how did each of us get involved in the Defend Assange movement?
Oh, geez. I didn't know we were going to get personal questions. So, okay, Andrew and I kind of found each other through another show, and we just realized that we kind of lived literally very close to each other, and we were both passionate about free speech a free press and Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning situation. And we both kind of have a different set of skills where it just meshes together well. But as far as me personally, just being very passionate about this, I've always been passionate about free speech, a free press, and our rights as citizens. And I kind of just heard, I can't really pinpoint an exact moment, but I remember just like briefly hearing about the Assange case a few years back and just finding it to be such a bizarre story where I kind of just looked into it myself. And that kind of brought me towards more alternative news sources. And then that's kind of how it just went from there.
Cool. So with me, my first exposure to WikiLeaks was actually Chelsea Manning's release that came out with the Iraq War diaries, the Afghanistan war logs, Cablegate, and stuff like that. And that's where that's basically where I owe like my beginning of the waking up process, so to speak, was just sitting there as a kid reading those documents at an age that I probably shouldn't have been reading them. But it's a good thing it got me here. But later in life, I guess when I got politically active a second time was during the Bernie Sanders campaign. When he got cheated in 2016, I joined the Green Party of Ohio and started campaigning. I've run for office twice, one for State House of Representative and once for school board. Both times I didn't make it on the ballot because of petitioning issues, which is basically their first hurdle that they put up. But after that, it was basically just following the issue. Like as all of the DNC leaks came out from WikiLeaks and all of the Podesta emails and all of these other things, it was me just watching and reading them and just becoming invested and involved in investigating that again. And then just watching the court case develop, I couldn't just sit back anymore and watch someone get prosecuted like this. So when he actually got drug out of the Ecuadorian embassy, I believe it was a Thursday, after work on Friday, I left and drove straight to DC to try to get involved with the protests that they were doing outside of the embassy at the time. But unfortunately, they had already stopped. Like I got there at about 10:45 and they had left at about 9. And then the next day they went to New York City. So I basically had a day in DC just to kind of reflect. And that's where I got the idea to start doing all this. So that's kind of how just one thing led to another. And now we're here. Steve?
Oh, sure. So I I found out about WikiLeaks through the Gitmo manual drop. And that was right about the time or a little bit later that John Kiriakou came out on CNN and disclosed the torture program. And then I didn't put 2 and 2 together that it was WikiLeaks until the following year when they did the Scientology drop. If people know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been involved in I guess advocate or activist journalism for quite a while, and have been invited to become successful elsewhere from the nation. That was fun, for writing an article that they didn't publish and then scrubbed my work from their shit. The article was called Barack Obama, Reagan with a Tan. And I wrote that in 2008, before the general election. I have yeah, I've been following this. I've been following the website, and I've been following the latest and most recent horror show in the what Chris Hedges calls the slow motion crucifixion of Julian Assange. If you haven't read that article, please go read that piece. It's incredible. When I started my show about a year ago, one of the first things that we mentioned and brought up was Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and what he had done, why he was there, that that empire is going to empire, and it's up to us to spread the word about it. So yeah, here I am about 9 months out of that, and here we are. I try to mention Julian Assange in most of my shows, and have had people like Elizabeth Voss on to come explain some stuff. So yeah, that's about where I'm at with this.
Cool. Well, how about you, Christy? Sorry, I have a stutter.
No, you're fine. So let's see, 2008-ish, about the time, yeah, that election was going on. I was more involved with politics, started to be a little bit more aware of who Ron Paul was. So yeah, maybe a little bit before then. So I kind of think of like Ron Paul and WikiLeaks, like those like couple years really started to wake me up what was happening in the world, and what the US was doing in the world. And so yeah, following, the different leaks that would get dropped throughout the years. And then when Ron Paul ran for the 2012 election, I started volunteering for the campaign, and really getting involved and really starting to call out what Republicans and Democrats were doing, and being really upset about what was happening in the Middle East. So yeah, and from there, I mean, I was following WikiLeaks whenever something would drop. And then I would say 2018 really changed for me, for hearing what was going on in the MC, especially when Julian was gagged and his internet was taken away. And when that went down, it really brought my attention to what is going on, what's happening, and why is this happening, and why is he still there? And so then Unity for Jay formed about that time. And then a few months later, after the first couple vigils, they started calling out for volunteers. And at that point, I really, and I've talked about this before, I really didn't know how I was going to help from my vantage point. Since I wasn't a journalist, I didn't really know what use I could be. And so a few weeks went by, and I decided to volunteer, and then signed up to be on the Twitter team. And so kind of went from there as far as getting involved, and getting to work with amazing people, and learning more about WikiLeaks, and learning more about Julian and the intricacies of what was going to happen, what he had predicted would happen if he was arrested, and then seeing that play out in the last few months has been, I mean, for us who knew and had heard him talk about that, it maybe wasn't as eye-opening, but in a way it was, because he was really right, and he really, for the last 7 or 8 years, knew what was going to happen if he was arrested and if he walked out of that embassy, and he was pulled out, and he was, like Andrew was saying at the beginning of the vigil, he was literally kidnapped out of there for $1 billion, $4.2 billion IMF loan. He was trafficked out of there, and yanked out of there, and violated in every way of his citizenship and his political asylum. There was a procedure for that, what was supposed to be followed when you try to take that away from somebody, and it was not. And so I think the longer I've been involved, the more I get impassioned to keep being involved, and to keep being a supporter, and trying to help amplify his words and his work, and doing whatever I can.
All right. Thanks, Christy. Brooke, what about you? How did you get involved in this Free Julian Assange fight, I guess?
Well, as a publisher from way back, I mean, I can't imagine any reporter or anybody who's done journalism not being engaged in this, and not being, just on red alert, because I mean, this is going to affect everybody if they're allowed to get away with this. And so, it's part of, you know, my larger political orientation. But you know, this is one of those things that I think is fundamental. If we lose this fight, we lose the ability to fight other fights. You know, we lose the ability for free speech and for freedom of the press. And you know, that is a big win for the baddies. You know, and we can't let them have it.
That's a really good point you bring up. I'm glad you mentioned that, because the consequences, if we lose this fight, the consequences are devastating, truthfully. And
Yeah.
we can't do what we do. And I can't even begin to imagine really what that will look like. Let's hope we don't have to get there. And that's why we're doing these vigils and really encouraging people to, you know, take to the streets and write letters and just become active.
And I think something too, it's really important to mention that the only way that things like this have ever been gained is by people actively working at it. That no one's coming to save us. There's not some magical force that's going to step in and take away all the bad in the world. Like, it takes people putting effort and time and money and energy into doing that. And it's something that we talked about early on. Like, they're dumb. Like, the CIA is dumb. They have the same playbook that they've been rolling out since the end of World War II, essentially. They have so many moves at their disposal, and it's up to people like us to find creative ways around it. And to Brooke's point of it's all interconnected, that free speech is the core fundamental, and freedom of association even more so mixed in there. And that's why I really want to start doing, just the term I use is intersectional activism, like bringing on other activists in other struggles from other countries and around the world to this vigil to highlight the struggle is more than the struggle against tyranny, and the struggle against the same forces that are attacking Julian Assange and our freedom of speech are the same forces that are allowing ICE to exist and using them as a tyrannical force, even down to the same documents in that case. And if you're a Second Amendment supporter, the same forces that want to disarm the populace are the same forces that are prosecuting Julian Assange. And it's just connected to so many other issues that using a platform like this where we can build and have other creators on to show them and ask them these kinds of questions too, I think is really cool. So that's something I'm going to try to get to, that I'd really like help with from like people in the audience, just to make suggestions of, hey, this is a really cool activist group. Like,
MKR people, and we want to not bother them to the point where they don't want to come on, but definitely, you know, try to bring it to their attention. That's really helpful, because we would love to have, you know, different voices on, and people to kind of describe and get into the certain things that they are doing, and also people with bigger platforms, so the message can be spread to more people.
And I'd like to touch on something Brooke said, and when she said, I don't understand how as a journalist you couldn't be, you know, advocating Julian Assange's freedom, Chelsea Manning's freedom, more organizations like WikiLeaks. And that's kind of how you can tell who's being paid to lie to you. If you're watching anyone, if you're reading anything that is just outright smearing this guy, and there's nothing substantive as to why they even have these charges laid out against him, or why he was kidnapped in broad daylight, or why his ability to communicate with the outside world was taken away from him, or why he was imprisoned in a fucking embassy with surveillance from God knows how many countries on him for the better part of a fucking decade. That's that you'll never see an explanation from anyone in the media who is being paid to misunderstand the situation or misrepresent the situation, where any of those issues are addressed.
Yeah, I understand they're probably not allowed to speak the truth on this issue, but for those who are just starting out in new media that I come across often too, a lot of them don't really know about this, and they don't really care a whole lot. And I don't know if it's just because they feel that it's not going to affect them, or they just don't really care about the repercussions of trying somebody with espionage for the mere receipt and publication of information. I don't know if it's that they don't know or if they just like don't really care. I think many times, oftentimes in America, things have to directly affect us personally for us to understand the full magnitude of the outcomes of what could potentially happen, if that makes any sense. But what I mean is that it's the same thing with the climate change issue. We are seeing the effects of it, but not to a great extent right now. And I think it's going to take like for people to really feel the effects for there to be some change put forth and changes being implemented.
So Jessica said in the chat, Jessica Mooney again, nice to get to know each of you personally, especially since we all feel inadequate to help, but know it's imperative that we do. Love each of your energy and integrity. So one thing, I don't really like highlighting the things I do too much because I'm just one person and I like showing what other people do more. But that's why, like, everyone on this stream is just a normal person right now. Like, we're not in the greatest economic situations. Like, we're literally just human beings living our lives. Like, I'm at my job right now at 11 o'clock at night, Eastern Standard United States time, to be able to do this right now. So it's, the way I try to describe it is doing what you can with what you have. Like, use your time, energy, and money that isn't going to destroy the rest of your life or the rest of your process or the rest of just what you do in your normal day, but figure out where you can make a $25 sacrifice to go and print some signs, buy a staple gun, and post them up on wooden utility poles. So it's something that for everyone out there that feels like there's all these big problems that we can do nothing about, like, that's what I hope to resolve with the calls to action, where we say, hey, go out and put up X amount of signs or pass out X amount of wristbands if you have them or what have you. Like this week, go out and take pictures of literal strangers at some kind of community event after having a conversation about Julian Assange and his situation, and post them under the hashtag We Are Millions. And then if you want to, absolute determination and hostile non-state intelligence agent. And that's just ways for us as individuals fighting and knowing what's happening in the world right now to feel better, but also as a way to connect with other people that also feel that same way in our community. And it may not be the issue of Julian Assange that necessarily touches them, but it's the same structure and system that exists that is putting them in that financial situation or caused X thing to allow them to not be able to afford whatever emergency that happened in their life. So it's something that being able to show people like this is one person that's fighting this way, but then going out and actually doing something in your community. Like someone brought up the idea to me of having a town hall, and like to me that's exciting and terrifying at the same time. But I think something that would be really important to remember too is our communities won't find out about these things unless we tell them. Like, that's why, to the point that it still exists right now, we have the freedom of association, we have the freedom of expression, we have the freedom of speech to the extent that it's allowed and in the forms that it's allowed. So it's a matter of using what we have. Like with Action for Assange, for example, it's not an organization. We don't take donations, like to the point that like people have been like, hey, we want X thing from you and we'll give you money. And we say, no, give it to Julian Assange or Chelsea Manning or the Courage Foundation or what have you. But the way we describe ourselves is literally like a freely associating group of individuals expressing our freedom of speech. So it's just, we're a non-legal entity. We're just people acting in a way. It's an activist organization or an activist networking group.
I want to make an announcement too. Yeah. Also, on that, I will be in Denver. I've been trying to reach out to our Denver friends. I will be in Denver. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. Something totally unrelated. I'm filming a documentary on the cannabis industry in the U.S. I'm really looking forward to it. But while I'm there, I do want to, post signs, and I also will have these yellow wristbands for you guys. Please contact me on Twitter at action_for Assange for information for us to like potentially meet up. I know I spoke with some people and they had some ideas, but yeah, I'll be in Denver tomorrow through Sunday. I leave to go back to Ohio. So I really do want to kind of engage with you guys, and I feel very compelled. I can't go somewhere and not do something for
There's
this
a press
cause.
club
So,
in Denver.
oh, is there?
There
Okay.
is. There's a Denver Press Club. It's one of
Okay.
the like 14 cities that has one. So if they
Okay.
have a physical location, it might be cool to go put signs up
Definitely.
on their
Yeah.
block. or something.
Yeah, it's important to hit locations of significance. And also for you guys, anybody that wants these yellow Action for Assange wristbands, I have directions. We're still working on how to efficiently kind of distribute them, but because you guys do want them and you want to take them to certain events, we did put up directions on how to order them. I know it's not the most sophisticated way to go about it, but you can find them that way. Christy, yours are going to be coming in soon for me to then send to you. And Steve, Brooke, if you guys want them, yeah, just go to our website. I think we have information on it, or we could send it to you guys since you are, a part of this vigil with us. But I think it's just a great way to kind of make people feel unified in this effort.
Absolutely. Because one thing too, what's coming up, it's county fair season. I'm pretty sure every county in the country has a county fair. I don't know exactly how that works. I know the ones around me do, but we're kind of rural in certain parts. Something cool that once more events like this start coming up, like political events and stuff like that, going out and passing out wristbands and shaking people's hands and asking them if they want to pass out wristbands and shake people's hands for Julian, or just talking with other people at these events, like going to your county fair and just literally spending a day passing out flyers and talking to people about it. So those are really good things, and we don't know what we're going to do with the wristbands yet, but the bulk order form, I think it's on our website. So I'll probably put that in the description box, and if it's not on our website, I'll put it up there so that way it's there for everybody. And we got Tulsi Gabbard to wear the wristband. That's super exciting.
I saw that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was exciting.
Cool. Do we want to wrap up? We still got 18 people that we're boring to death right now.
Any questions for us? Or go ahead, Christy.
Oh, I just wanted to put a quick plug in for Unity for J that our Twitter account is back. So if you don't follow us, please come over and follow us at Unity letter 4 J. We had a week-long suspension and we got account amplify different groups in the world. Anytime Friday, let us know. We will amplify those out there. We're always retweeting news. We're always just trying groups on the ground are doing. So yeah.
Yeah, so make sure you guys do follow at Unity, the number 4 J. They are back up, which is really exciting, and we're happy about that. And you guys got more followers as a result of it, so it kind of backfired in a way. So we're glad that you are back up. Is there any last thoughts from anybody before we close out?
Yeah, so Andrew's been on my show a couple of times now, and we had a great conversation about decentralized activism. And if you are so inclined, go over to Slow News Day and subscribe to that. I do have some incredible interviews. In fact, everybody that's on this show right now has been on my show. Let's kick ass. At any rate, decentralized activism is a way that you can go out and you can spread a message about Julian Assange, about press freedom, about Chelsea Manning, and know that you won't be infiltrated because it's you and 2 of your friends. And you can do this with several different groups of friends, and you could all go out and do it at the same time, but you know you can't be infiltrated because it's just you and a couple of your friends.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yep, and that's something too, because I know, like personally, just a lot of things that happened in the Occupy movement that were all because of FBI infiltration and intelligence apparatus infiltration. So it's super important that throughout this entire process, like even like as we start doing things as like individuals more and more and have different events and stuff, that we set certain limits for yourself and don't let any you.
Oh,
We're
Okay.
reconnecting now.
okay,
We're connected again.
okay. Do you guys want to